I'm Scott Alexander, and in this video I'm going to continue my discussion of Maimonides' 26 Propositions of Aristotelian Philosophy, which is located in the introduction to Volume 2 of his Guide to the Perplexed. In this video I'll be dealing with what I'll call the force propositions, which are propositions 10 through 12. I'll briefly introduce what Maimonides meant by the term force and go through each of the propositions. I'll explain how Maimonides will use these propositions in his grand proof for the existence of God in the next chapter. Now, the force propositions are Proposition 10, the types of forces in bodies, Proposition 11, their distribution and division, and Proposition 12, that they must be finite in size and power. The importance of the concept of force for Maimonides was the realization set forth in Proposition 10, which is that everything is said to be in a physical body is either subsisting through that body, such as its accidents, or the body subsists because of it, as with its natural form. Both are forces in the body. Now let's break this down. First, why does he call both accidents and forms forces? The reason that he calls accidents and forms forces is because they either give rise to the substance of the physical body, or they give rise to its various accidental qualities, such as its color or temperature. Now, everything that exists is said to exist either in itself, those are the substances, or in another, those are the accidents. Now, those accidents, those things that are not substances, are again divided into two parts. Those which exist only through another substance, and those are what we usually specify when we use the term accidents, and those that, although they exist in the substance, confer existence on it, and those are what we call forms. Thus, there were two types of accidents: the form, which confers substantiality on the substance, and the accidents proper, that subsist through the substance and are its manifested qualities, like color or temperature. To simplify this nomenclature, Maimonides calls both forces in a body, whether they are forms or accidents. Now let's talk about what Maimonides meant when he used the term natural form. It is a specific philosophic term. In the proposition, when Maimonides talked about the forms that cause the body to subsist, he then specifies, quote, as with its natural form, hatsura hativit. Now he mentions this idea of the natural form in order to counteract pre-Socratic theories like atomism. The pre-Socratic atomists believed that the qualities of a substance were accidents that change every moment, the result being that there was no stable nature in existence. The Kalam Muslim theologians embraced those outmoded theories. Any substance we see was for them recreated in its entirety at every moment. That apple in front of you is a new, completely different apple at every moment, or it could turn out to be a banana in the next moment. This notion was designed to destroy any concept of nature. Maimonides argued, in opposition to this, that everything was composed of matter and form, not atoms, and that the natural form of a thing, like for instance, a piece of iron, conferred all of its usual stable properties and qualities on it, like in the case of iron, its hardness or its gray color. So in the case of people, the natural form of humans as rational animals confers on us our usual stable qualities of rationality and animation. And this is what you expect in any human being. Maimonides will use this proposition in the next chapter to show that the infinite force causing the cosmic spheres to move in infinite motion cannot be in those finite spheres. Infinite motion cannot be in the spheres because all bodily forces must be finite, since the body itself is finite. And just because all bodies are finite, they must eventually come to rest. Even the human soul and mind, which move accidentally with their finite body, must come to rest. Therefore, neither the accidents, nor the natural forms, nor the soul, or the mind, or any finite thing could cause the perpetual motion of the spheres. Only an external, infinitely powerful, incorporeal, unmoved mover could do that. And that could only be God. And that brings us to Proposition 11, which is about division and distribution. Some things that are said to subsist in the physical body divide accidentally when the body is divided. For example, coloration, and the rest of the forces distributed through the body, while some that cause the body to subsist cannot be divided in any way, such as the soul and intellect. Let me give some examples. So the accidental color of hair is divisible with that hair, despite that your hair doesn't cover all your body. The general coloration of a body always stays with any division of that body, so long as that division is not so thoroughgoing as to completely crush or grind up its substance. So if you were to cut up an emerald into two parts, both could be polished to a brilliant green color. But if you smashed it with a hammer, the resulting powder would be white. The splitting of the gemstone is merely an accidental division, but the crushing of it represents a substantial change into a completely different substance, a white powder. And they thought that this was true with the souls of lower animals, which is the soul that causes them to move, their animating soul. The animal souls of the lower animals were said to be divided with the division of the animal. So, for instance, severed snakes continue to move. On the other hand, the human soul that grants us freedom of movement is not divided with the division of human beings. Neither is the mind divided with the body like the accidents are, such as coloration. The human mind and soul are thus not distributed through the human body such that they would be divisible with it as with the animating souls of snakes. They have a formal, substantial relationship to the body. But Maimonides did, however, think that they moved accidentally with the body in the same way that you move with your automobile when you drive, and when you walk, your mind and your soul go with you. Similarly, the souls of the cosmic spheres also stayed with the spheres, but were not distributed through the spheres or divisible with them. This, by the way, is one of the bases for the grand analogy that Maimonides made in chapter 72 between the macrocosm of the celestial spheres and the microcosm of each individual person. Maimonides and many of his contemporaries thought that the cosmic spheres closely parallel the human microcosm of them in their structure and nature. As an example of this, since the souls of the cosmic spheres moved accidentally with those spheres, they should, to maintain the parallel, at some point come to a halt, just like our souls come to a halt when we stop walking. If you'll recall, Proposition 8, which I talked about in the last video, stated that all accidental motion must eventually be interrupted by coming to rest. The heavens, therefore, should also come to rest. Nonetheless, we see that the heavens keep rotating. It follows that some other mover, external to the cosmic system and possessing infinite power, must cause this rotation. Without trying to defend the cosmology of the Aristotelian invisible spheres, we can still appreciate Maimonides' point that eternal motion cannot have its source in a finite corporeal substance. His point was that our explanation of eternal motion must ultimately transcend the world of physical things. And that's why the infinite force required to produce the infinite motion of the universe must come from outside the physically finite cosmic spheres. And these considerations are what brought Aristotle to posit the existence of an external unmoved mover. And Proposition 12, which we'll get to now, encapsulates this doctrine. It reads that every force distributed through the body is finite because the body is finite. This finitude axiom is critically important to all the force propositions. It's really the key to the whole section. Maimonides will use this proposition to argue that no corporeal force can produce perpetual motion, since finite bodies only have a finite force. The perpetual motion of the universe must ultimately be due to an incorporeal, infinite force external to the universe as its first cause. Now, why does Maimonides think that this finitude proposition is true? It's simply a corollary of Proposition 1, that there could be no infinite corporeal thing. Since all physical forces occur in finite physical bodies, it followed that none of those forces could ever be infinite. Only an infinite incorporeal force could keep them in infinite everlasting motion. Now here's another key point. There is no possible aggregation, addition, or combination of finite forces that could equal an infinite force. Now there's an argument in Aristotle's physics which clinched the truth of this corollary. The argument is that any time the forces in a finite body cause its finite body to move, its speed must be a definite number. For example, 50 miles per hour. But if there were a second finite body, and you could conceive that it had an infinite force, that second body would obviously move further or faster than the first body's 50 miles an hour. Based on this, Aristotle said, surely the time of the infinite force would not admit to being anything at all. What he meant was that it would take place in zero time. Here is his proof, which I've suitably updated. Let's imagine that we have two drag racers. One has a black Dodge Charger, which has infinite horsepower. Now this is an obvious fantasy since no car has infinite horsepower, but let's go with it. How long would it take for the Dodge Charger to race 50 miles? It would seem, based on what we just said, that it should take no time at all, zero time, like Aristotle said, since it has infinite horsepower. Now the other racer in this drag race has an extremely souped-up Mitsubishi, which can go 150 miles an hour. At that speed, he should be able to cover his 50 miles in 20 minutes, which is pretty good, but it's obvious he's going to lose to the Dodge Charger with its infinite horsepower. But what if he were to change the engine of the Mitsubishi? What if he were to add nitrous oxide and do other things to add more horsepower, different kinds of fuels, any other kind of additive that he could think of? Supposedly, if he kept adding more finite forces to the car, putting in more horsepower, at some point you'd think that he should be able to cover the same fixed 50 miles in the same time that it took the Dodge with its infinite horsepower to cover. But that would be absurd. There's no way that the finite total of those finite forces that he added would move his Mitsu at the same velocity as the Dodge Charger's infinite horsepower. No matter how much horsepower he adds, his Mitsubishi could never equal the infinite force of the Dodge Charger. Therefore, there's no way that any finite or corporeal force or any aggregation of those finite forces could ever equal an infinite force. The payoff for Maimonides was that under no conception of the cosmos would any part of it, or even all of it, be able to keep itself moving in eternal motion. There must be some other explanation for that eternal infinite motion. Now let's talk for a minute about some later developments that occurred with this model based on these propositions. Later Jewish scholastics recognized that the force of Proposition 12 would gut the Aristotelian Maimonidean model of philosophical astronomy. And here's why. In that old model, the spheres are composed of matter and form, which move through volition and desire in eternal rotation. They try to move toward God because they love God, but since they can't reach Him, they move in an endless rotation. But the question comes up, how could the matter of the finite sphere move eternally if it's a finite composite of matter and form, as Aristotle said it was? Since finite matter always engenders the interruption of its motion, as we learned in Proposition 8, the sphere could rotate eternally only if it were without matter. Still, when we look at the visible heavens, they seem to be physical in nature. The only real solution to this problem, as well as to the many, many other problems that were being generated by the old cosmic paradigm, was to overthrow it. Those problems moved astronomy toward the great Copernican paradigm shift, which relocated the universe's center away from the Earth. It replaced those crystalline ensouled spheres with simple planetary orbits moving through inertia like we accept today. But nonetheless, I caution you that nothing in our modern paradigm explains the origin or persistence of motion. It remains the greatest problem in physics to explain what happened in the first moment of the Big Bang, which starts our universe of motion. The truth is, we still have not solved Maimonides' problematic of motion. In the next video in this series, I'll talk about the propositions of continuity and discontinuity, which are propositions 13 through 16. I'll explain how continuity and discontinuity is manifest in motion, in time, and in number. And I'll also explain about the consequences of discontinuity. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. You may contact me at scottmalexander@rcn.com with comments, questions, and criticism. Please click on the description panel of this talk on YouTube to see documents which I may have mentioned in this talk. Please visit my website, Maimonides-guide.com, to see my commentary essays on each chapter of Maimonides' Guide of the Perplexed, currently completed through the entire first volume, and now including my commentary on Maimonides' Introduction to the second volume. On that website, you'll also find associated essays that I've written, podcasts, videos, and important links. And of course, like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe, and hit the YouTube notification bell. Thank you.